Pierre Poilievre hosts a Fix the Broken Border press conference today on a Sunday afternoon. Pierre held a press conference and answered a few questions about what he would do to fix the border. But first, he obviously talked about all the issues and things that are broken at our border and way things are getting across our border, like drugs, crime, guns, and illegal migrants coming across the border. This all stemmed from the threat of Trump's 25% tariffs on Canada if they don't sort out the border issue. And here we are. Trudeau obviously flew down to Mar-a-lago on Friday to discuss things with Trump, which we'll get to here shortly. And then as well, Poilievre then hosts a press conference to discuss the issues of the border and how it should be fixed. What I find very interesting about this is 8 weeks ago, if anyone brought up any issue with the border, they would have been labeled as racist and bigoted. But now elections have consequences. Oh, what do you mean, Josh? What are you talking about? I'm just going off about the things I've discussed on the show for years at this point of how it is very important to focus and keep an eye on what is happening in politics south of the border because they directly have an impact on our politics here in Canada as they are our biggest trading partner. Here we are. Case in point. It's racist to talk about borders. It's a racist to talk about the drugs that are coming across the border. Now, Trump wins south of the border. He's very passionate about fixing and closing off the border on the northern and southern points of the United States. And now immigration is now the topic of reference and discussion in our country because he threatened to put on 25% tariffs based on this very issue. And so whether this is how we wanted to get here or not, this is where we are. We are talking about the issue that's been staring us in the face for so long is our border and how it needs to be fixed. And so today you have Pierre Poilievre in light of Trudeau's visit down to Mar-a-Lago talking about what needs to be fixed at the border. Some facts that he referenced was that there's 350 organized crime groups directly involved in the illegal fentanyl market and who have been identified by CSIS, 350 of them, organized crime groups, all in the illegal fentanyl market. Apparently, Trudeau got note of these groups working within Canada and illegally bringing in fentanyl into our country a year ago. Last January 2024, he got a note from CSIS about this very issue, and he did nothing about it. There you go. Another interesting stat that was brought up in this press conference was the fact that according to Toronto Police, 82% of gun crime is committed by American guns due to the weak inspection system at our border. To all of us really smart people who saw through the crazy attack on legal gun owners in this country, imagine that. Gun crime has gone up, and most of it is being done by illegal guns. Wow. Wonder who could have seen that coming. And then obviously throughout the press conference, he kind of addressed the other things that are broken in the country, yada, 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 the typical Poilievre speaking points. But here is a good summation of what Poilievre wants to see fixed at our border and what he would do to address it if he was in power.
That is why today I am calling on the government to fix Trudeau's broken border. I'm demanding that the Trudeau government quickly present a Canada First plan to Parliament that includes increased patrols, working with provincial law enforcement, deploying new technology, cracking down on illegal drug production and trafficking, tightening visas, securing our ports, and expanding the mandate of CBSA officers to fix the broken border. These new technologies would include scanners, helicopters, towers, drones. We also propose temporarily deputizing provincial law enforcement whose premiers wish to fill in the holes the Trudeau government has caused. This, of course, is I'm embarrassed that we even have to suggest this, but it would be a temporary measure to fix what Trudeau, or to patch up the holes that Trudeau has opened. We need a real crackdown on illegal drug production and trafficking by reversing, for example, the C5 changes that Trudeau brought in, which reduced penalties for production and trafficking of hard drugs. We need boots on the ground, scanners all around, and a stronger border. We need to expand the mandate of CBSA officers to enforce the law beyond border posts. The reality is that Trudeau has lost control of the deficit of immigration and of our border. In less than 2 months, President Trump will come into office. He has threatened the possibility of imposing tariffs unless there is action to address Trudeau's broken border. Since Trudeau became Prime Minister, there have been massive increases in illegal border activity. It is his job to immediately introduce action to solve it. Now, it's not just...
And then he goes on to other things that he, is typically a part of Poilievre's platform. But it was interesting kind of hearing how the idea of deputizing provincial police to be able to fill in and help out the CBSA with apprehending illegal activity. That is something that, again, has never been really discussed in this country ever. Deputizing provincial police to help out with border activities in CBSA. That's crazy. It is so interesting as Canadians, obviously we kind of get hit with all the things that we've never seen in our lifetimes, nor have we heard our parents talk about experiencing in this country. We're all experiencing it within the past 10 years. Or even so, if you really want to get crazy, really experiencing it at top level speed within the past 5 years. It's been a lot. It's a lot on people's mental health. That's a lot on people who just want this guy to go away, all these things. And so it was intriguing to kind of hear Poilievre's ideas of what he would do to address the border issues. But one thing I really appreciated was actually the reporters who were questioning Poilievre today. There was actually some really good questions, and I honestly really appreciated it. There wasn't really any gotcha moments from the press, which was appreciated. It was pretty direct lines of questioning, trying to see if we can get an answer out of Pierre, and he actually did a pretty good job of answering them. One that really stood out was from this reporter right here.
Thank you. Jeremy from CTV News. Your party continues to lead public opinion polls. If you form government, how quickly would you meet NATO's defense spending target of 2%?
That's a good question. First of all, let's all acknowledge that I will be inheriting a dumpster fire of a budget. The national debt has been doubled. The deficit is raging out of control. We know last year's deficit was at least 20% bigger than Trudeau claimed. The Prime Minister won't even tell us what this year's deficit is after having asked him all of those times. Our economic growth is collapsing. Per capita GDP dropped for 6 quarters in a row. I'm not saying this to dodge your question. I'm just telling you what the mess I'm going to be inheriting, because we have to fund our military out of the money that we have. What I have said so far is that I will be cutting foreign aid by taking money away from dictators, terrorists, and global bureaucracies. I'll be cutting back office bureaucracy and ending the procurement boondoggles. We will put all of that extra savings into rebuilding our armed forces, expanding the reserves, and deepening our presence in the north to protect our part of North America and reassure our American allies that we are a solid security partner. That is going to be necessary, not just for our security, but for our economy.
I thought that was a fantastic question. Pretty direct, obviously, because our 2% contribution to the NATO targets when it comes to our military spending is really crucial and really important. And to the person who is just thinking normally and with a common sense, we are kind of tapped out for money. How are we going to fund our broken military after Trudeau leaves? Like, how is that even going to happen? And so I actually kind of like the way Poilievre addressed this. I love that he addressed the idea like, yeah, we are going to be inheriting a mess. And I was waiting, and I was expecting him to use that as an example to kind of, as he said, dodge the question here. But he kind of laid it out and then proceeded to say, yeah, so knowing that that's what we're going to be inheriting, I'm going to be cutting back on foreign aid, going to be cutting out on different federal bureaucracies, global bureaucracies, and all out of that savings is what we're going to use to rebuild our military. That's fascinating. Like, that's a really straightforward idea, and an answer I actually really appreciate. Because that's something even Reg and I have been discussing here on the show is, what does a post-Trudeau life look like? How do you repair these things? How do you start rebuilding the country after Trudeau goes? And these are some really good forward-thinking ideas, which I can appreciate. And the idea of deputizing, again, provincial police to also help secure the border is an interesting idea too, which we'd love to see. Obviously, Ontario and Ford has brought up this idea with their CBSA officers in Ontario. And I know Alberta, with Danielle Smith, has thought about doing this idea as well. So we'll see what happens. But I really did appreciate that. I thought this was going to be more of a traditional Poilievre play of all the bad things Trudeau's doing. See ya, have a good day. This was actually some pretty decent solutions that were being brought forward of what he would do, and I really appreciated it. Fix the broken border. Wow, how we got here. This was such a niche topic in the mainstream, which you'd be demonized for. Now we're talking about it for everything that it's worth. And that's why I say elections have consequences. And my American friends who make fun of us for caring about who won the American election, it's these reasons right here. Because during a Biden-Kamala administration, we didn't hear about immigration once, at least here in Canada. We didn't hear about tariffs on us once here in Canada. There were tariffs we have been paying for. However, aggressive tariffs in response to things have fallen behind on never would have happened with a Harris-Biden administration, and didn't, and then wouldn't with a Harris-Walz administration either. So it is fascinating that way. Speaking of Trump, speaking of these things, Trudeau took a trip on Friday, talked to Donald Trump down to Mar-a-lago, went to go kiss the ring, be told what he's going to be doing. And it was fascinating. Trudeau took his entourage with him, and Vashi got some information. Vashi from CTV, Kapelos, was discussing what she's been hearing of what happened in these meetings, people that were involved, things that were discussed. And I thought it was something that we could play here and let you know and show you what's up.
Yeah, which is super unusual, Heather. I can tell you that has not happened on an official piece of business for the Prime Minister, at least since I've been covering him for almost the last decade. But as for that meeting, I am getting some details from people. One person who actually attended the meeting, another who was involved with setting it up. And I can tell you that it lasted 3 hours. I am told by those sources that it was a positive, wide-ranging dinner, that topics included in this order: trade, border security, fentanyl, defense, including NATO, Ukraine, and icebreakers, the purchase of, I imagine, China, energy, including the KXL pipeline, the Keystone XL pipeline, Line 5, TMX, and LNG exports, as well as the upcoming G7, which is scheduled, Canada actually is scheduled to host next year, or into the spring. And then I'm told there was also lots of social talk. Now, the list of who was at this dinner is also pretty sort of significant as well. Alongside the Prime Minister, our minister who oversees the border, the Minister of Public Safety, Dominic LeBlanc, his Chief of Staff, Katie Telford, as well as Governor Doug Burgum, who is the nominee for the Interior Secretary position. He's going to be the energy czar for Donald Trump. Howard Lutnick, his nominee for Commerce Secretary, and his National Security Advisor nominee, Mike Waltz, along with their partners. You can really tell it's all about security, the border, and now also energy, Heather.
Vashi, thank you for this. Appreciate the insight.
So that kind of gives you an idea of what was discussed. We can expect what was discussed based on the threats that were, uttered by Trump on Truth Social. But the fact that, Trudeau brought his team, Trump was there with his team discussing things like trade, discussing energy, discussing border security. And so I'm very curious what's going to happen, mainly around the discussion. I'm curious the discussion happened around energy caps. Obviously, that really ticked off Daniel Smith a few weeks ago when Trudeau's government announced that they were instituting energy caps on Alberta. And so now I'm curious, Trump acknowledging that and knowing that his whole plan is to drill, baby, drill. Knowing that that's his goal and what he wants to do, I'm curious what that conversation was like in terms of the energy caps. I'm sure that was a big point of the conversation. So, Trudeau left and he went back home and they did their thing. We will be curious to see what more results came out of this meeting. But we know from what we've seen, what we've heard from both sides, both Trump and Trudeau, that it was a positive meeting. However, keep this in mind, nothing was taken off the table. They had positive meetings about these very significant issues between our countries, but Trump didn't take off the 25% tariff threat. That's not off the table. Clearly, it's a negotiating tactic to a degree for him, so we'll see it happens. Last but not least, watch this. This is the Prime Minister of the UK.
This happened by design, not accident. Policies were reformed deliberately to liberalise immigration. Brexit was used for that purpose, to turn Britain into a one-nation experiment in open borders. Global Britain. Remember that slogan? That is what they meant. A policy with no support and which they then pretended wasn't happening. This happened by
an open border policy experiment. Tune in tomorrow. We will be releasing a video on this specific thing tomorrow morning. Enjoy your Sunday night. I'll see you later. Peace.